Well, you're looking good, and it feels good to be with you today. Hello, I'm Kendall Bryan Hunter, author of this book, Consider My Servant Job. And this is Come Follow Me, Get to the Point, where I always show up, I always come prepared, we never take roll, and I always get to the point. Yeah, get my book, February, shortest month, slower motion, you know where to buy it. Let's see, we got Groundhog Day, Valentine's Day, and then President's Day. 3 holidays in 1 month, the shortest month. Plus, we get mattress sales thrown in there. So grab a copy of my book after, of course, you buy that important mattress sale. Well, today's theme is Gifts in the Heavenly Order. 2 sections today, Section 10, Section 11. Now, really, this is the main out-of-order section. This should appear directly after Section 3. And it gets really aggravating because you're reading it. The narrative goes ahead, and you have this there. And so you kind of forgive the people. I think it may have been Orson Pratt who put it in this order. It's interesting over time. We've churches dug into the archives and made some corrections to the Doctrine and Covenants. B.H. Roberts, when he did his History of the Church, that was a time with Joseph Smith Papers. What's going on right now is another time that led to the 2013 edition of the Scriptures. Now, it's interesting. This... A little bit about Joseph Smith. Remember these manuals? You can buy these things from the church. I recommend getting a copy of this because this runs parallel to what we're studying in the Doctrine and Covenants. And it's interesting that we're reading about Joseph Smith. Probably his biggest mistake is losing the 116 pages. Joseph Smith said, "I never told you I was perfect." In fact, there's this chapter in here, Joseph Smith's feelings about his prophetic mission. So you're going to read this, or you're going to read the CES letter, which is going to give you the better picture. Make up your own mind, okay? Yeah, I've read it. I have a copy, but kind of go. The CS letter is someone's screwdriver they use to pry the door open so they can escape from the church. It's not a slam dunk that people make it out to be, but it's just a useful screwdriver that they can twist and then maybe drink the screwdriver once they're done, since they're no longer keeping their covenants. So criticizing Joseph Smith, certainly we've never hid anything from him. It's in the Doctrine and Covenants. In fact, the greatest piece of church critical literature, and by church critical literature, I mean anti-Mormon literature. I don't use that term because it perpetuates the incorrect name of the church. You're just stumbling over something that's really simple when you when you don't use the correct name of the church. But the most damning piece of church critical literature ever published is the Doctrine and Covenants, in the same way that the most anti-Semitic book ever written is the Old Testament. Because you see all these church leaders just screwing up left and right, and we're not hiding it. I remember we had a quorum instructor who got up and he was sort of talking off the top of his head, and he said, we should talk about Joseph Smith's faults and mistakes. And well, the quorum president wasn't saying anything, so I said something and spoke to him afterwards. I would have approached it a little bit differently. He was a lawyer. I would have said, teacher, you have a fiduciary relationship with the church. And are you acting in the best interests of your principal when you criticize Joseph Smith? And then the second I bring up the issue of a double standard, you're talking about his faults, and are you going to talk about your own faults? Are you going to do this in a really genuine way instead of saying, well, Lord knows that I'm imperfect, and then they upchuck that like a cat upchucks a hairball, and then start acting on it as if they're not imperfect? There's a paper written by Hugh Nibley called Criticizing the Brethren. You can go to the Maxwell Institute. It's in this book, Brother Brigham Challenges the Saints. Give that essay a read, and then write your own perspectives on criticizing the church. Now, on one hand, if you never criticize the church, then general authorities who are doing wrong things will never get excommunicated. We've had 2 general authorities excommunicated in my lifetime, George P. Lee and James Hamula. And we had one who was received some type of censorship rebuke, Elder Paul H. Dunn, who was exaggerating with some of his stories to the point where it was got him in trouble, where he's just saying things that wasn't true. It's funny because he could have created a fictional character told this story, and it would have worked no problem if he just said it was predictive instead of fiction, instead of ascribing it to himself. About that time, Elder Neil Maxwell gave this quote. In General Conference, Elder Maxwell said, "You cannot sin publicly and extensively and expect to be rescued and quickly and privately beaten with a few stripes." So I don't know what went on with Paul H. Dunn as opposed to the other general authorities. I know certainly with George P. Lee, he was very vocal about things, and vocal and incessant. I don't know about Elder Hamula, but you have that. On the other hand, is people just like feeding on the faults of others, sort of their breakfast, lunch, dinner, and midnight snack, just gorging themselves. This person's imperfect. It's a prideful thing. They need to tear other people down so they can feel good about themselves. So what's going on in Section 10? This is famous for where Joseph Smith was told, don't retranslate the 116 pages. What's going on is that, here's a picture. Here's another illustration. Here's some of that, the Book of Mormon manuscript, the printer's manuscript, as opposed to the original one. You can see the entire thing on the Joseph Smith Papers website, the original manuscript and the printer's manuscript. That's your go-to source instead of the CES letter. But the Lord says, don't retranslate it, because what's going to happen, apparently the manuscript had survived, maybe, or what the people would do is they'd produce another manuscript and change things around and say, hey, look, this is the original one. What Joseph Smith has published is actually the fake one. This is called a confusocracy maneuver. I use this on my political podcast, confusocracy. And what that was, that would have poisoned people's minds against the church. And so what the Lord did an opt-out strategy. Nice Sun Tzu Wu Wei approach to it. Say, okay, let's not confront them. Let's just drop the issue and move on. Sometimes that's the best maneuver you can take. So don't retranslate it. And it's interesting because in the manual, in chapter 4, it has a copy of, where is that? You can read it right here, page 63. Right here, in the preface to the first edition of the Book of Mormon, they have the preface that's in there. So you can read on the Joseph Smith Papers, or you can buy a replica copy, or you can just save your money. Much better, read this. The information's in there, unlike the things they tell you in the CS letter. And it's interesting because the preface borrows language from Section 10. As you read it, you'll notice a similarity in phraseology. Just said, don't do this, and this is the Lord's doing. And like I said, it's an interesting strategy to solve the problem. I mean, nowadays we have handwriting analysis. Things are time-stamped, and that would not necessarily be an issue. Certainly we back up stuff. Where are they at? Yeah, I keep like two flash drives for backing up my journals and stuff. So on the computer, then I have these two backups, and then you have the cloud storage. I learned my lesson. Now it's interesting, verses 41 through 45, the direction talks about Joseph Smith to keep on translating. And it's a little bit hard because we do not have the plates. We don't have a log from Joseph Smith about what he translated and where he did. And we don't have the original manuscript to see what was the full, complete manuscript to see what was going on. But scholarship suggests that what Joseph Smith did is that he translated all the way to Moroni 10, and then he translated what we call the small plates of Nephi, took those and put those at the beginning of the Book of Mormon to fill in the gap that was missing. And I'm not sure where the words of Mormon would fit in with all of that. But that's just sort of not so much a doctrinal, but a scholarship issue. It's interesting because the church published the Book of Mormon manuscripts. It's interesting. This is back when the Community of Christ still held them. We paid a pretty penny for them. We have in our control. Now what we do is just let anyone study them. You'd have to use licensing with the Community of Christ. Since you're all paying tithing, when the church has a good stock portfolio, we can give this stuff away for free, and that's how it should be. That's where your tithing money's going, is we're buying this stuff and just giving it away to people for free. There's nothing hindering the scholarship. No censorship involved. You want it, you got some questions, you look it on there. It's interesting because you go to Mosiah, the Book of Mosiah, and the Book of Mosiah starts with Roman numeral 3 on it. So it's in Roman numerals, not Arabic. And it's crossed out and just says Mosiah chapter 1. So it wasn't just the book of Lehi, but the first 2 chapters of the book of Mosiah. Now further, if you read the first edition of the Book of Mormon, you notice that the chapters are a lot longer. So this could actually, instead of being just 2, this could be possibly 4, maybe even 6 chapters worth of information missing. There's no colophon to the Book of Mosiah, and it starts abruptly. That's because part of it was lost with the translation. And that's another thing. When Joseph Smith tells stuff, he tends to compress things, so you get the broad brush, but not the minor details. But you're still getting the correct understanding. It's just not hyper precise. Now it's interesting because when the Lord rebukes him, he talks about how when the gift was withdrawn, how he's had a dark mind and was lost. Now, it's interesting how having a dark mind is a punishment to people. Think about the last time you sinned or you said something you shouldn't and what happened to your mind. Section 19 about Martin Harris, the things that he would experience, what it's like to have a dark mind, to walk around like that. The early brethren who were excommunicated and later were rebaptized, they talk about this experience. Martin Harris, Oliver Cowdery. Think celestial. There's a lot more going on with thinking celestial. Go back and read the book of Rome. I think it's Romans, where Paul talks about having the mind of Christ and having that with the Holy Ghost, getting the mind of Christ, thinking celestial, the covenant to always remember him. Those are all the same things. So Joseph Smith is given this counsel: don't run faster than you have strength, and don't labor more. Don't run faster than you can. Don't labor more than you have strength. This is just another way of what King Mosiah or King Benjamin says: do things in wisdom and order. And there's a danger of not scaling back. President Uchtdorf gave a talk about when you hit turbulence as an airline pilot. When you hit turbulence, you slow down. You don't speed up. There's a danger of church leaders overloading members, overloading families. We had a situation in my ward where we had a brother who was on the High Council. His wife was in the stake young woman's presence. Here may have been the president, and they had 2 children. So the father had to be in one area, one ward. The wife had to be in another ward. And who's taking care of the children? Well, that's where the ministering brothers step in. But what's that doing to that family? Do people have to move out of certain wards just for their safety? Law of diminishing returns. The more callings you have, the less effective you become because you become stretched too thin. Slow down and scale back. In fact, that might be something you can do on Sundays. Look at what you're doing and say, okay, where can I scale back? Cut back some of my reading. Cut back on a podcast. Raise the issue with your church leaders. I have had to do this where, look, I can't do this. This is overloading me. And sometimes they'll say, well, you need to sacrifice. If you sacrifice, the Lord will bless you. Well, that's not what this revelation is telling you. It's not telling you, okay, you can have an infinite capacity to do whatever because I will bless you and everything. No, the Lord's telling you, slow down and don't overload yourself. Pray to come off conqueror, to conquer Satan. You ever prayed that? Sometimes we think this is prideful, conquering people, but no, that's a legitimate gospel principle. Then Joseph Smith's told you can't judge the righteous from the wicked. You ever have that happen from you? You ever get some bad advice from a good friend? Because Joseph Smith was inexperienced, and well, you're always inexperienced. You're getting just less. You're not getting experience. You're just getting less inexperienced. Sometimes is the way to look at it. Hold your peace until the Lord commands. No pearls before swine. But think about that praying for the gift of discernment when you interact with people. I've had that happen where you pick up a bad vibe off of someone, you get a good vibe off of someone. You can, of course, create good relationships and poison relationships, but you just can't tell the righteous from the wicked. Like I said, I mentioned those 3 of the general authorities during my lifetime that gotten in trouble. And that's people getting vetted and interacting with the seers. So, I don't know. Another thing that this section says is, now, I do not say this to destroy the church, but I say this to build up my church. Now, the restoration is constructive. We're adding things. We're correcting things. But there's a bit of this tension with sectarian Christianity, specifically the Protestant branch of Christianity. You have Roman Catholic, you have Eastern Orthodox, you have Protestantism. Within Protestantism, just have a lot of branches, as you learn from the first vision. But you have this tension between the old churches and the branches of this old church, and they have the new sapling, the Restoration Church. We're not trying to destroy anything, but we're trying to correct things. In the Book of Commandments, there's this one revelation that was later changed. It's talked about the Lord would work a reformation. Now that's an interesting term. That's the term associated with Martin Luther, a reformation. But the Lord was working a reformation. And you also see the term restoration in the scriptures too. I read a book where there's some debate about it, but now that's a scriptural term. We're trying to fix a problem here, and of course there's going to be pruning, as you read about in the allegory of the olive tree. But this correction is actually helpful. It's the same thing when someone goes under church discipline or is excommunicated. That's actually helping them, whether you like it or not. Don't create a toxic community. G.K. Chesterton said, Christianity, even when watered down, is hot enough to boil all modern society to rags. And there's some truth to that. That's the greatest thing to happen, is Christianity in general. Look what it did to the arts, to music, to ideas of human nature and human dignity. How it was Christian countries that ended the slave trade. Christian countries inherited it. We didn't originate it. We inherited it and we stopped it. That took some time. I'm from California, which was not part of the Civil War. I live in Utah, which was, not part of the Civil War. And yeah, I'm familiar with things Brigham Young said, but there you go. However, Christianity, even when watered down, is hot enough to boil all modern society to rags. Neil Maxwell countered that with, diluted Christianity is not Christianity. And remember how the Book of Mormon grows together to confound doctrine. So the Book of Mormon's strength is it's an entwining. They grow to Book of Mormon, the Bible. So you're not reliant upon Catholic tradition and Aquinas and Augustine or whomever, or Luther or Calvin or Wesley, and trying to sort it all out and picking and choosing what you want to believe into your own version of Christianity, creating your own denomination of yourself. But there's specific truth that we believe, points of doctrine that are just indisputable. Verse 67, the church. Now remember, the church hasn't been organized yet. We're still translating the Book of Mormon. This is before the church's organization. Now the priesthood gets restored, and the church gets restored when the priesthood's restored. They're coterminous, they're coeval, but the church hasn't been organized. Make a distinction between restored versus organized. And it says, whomsoever repenteth and cometh unto me, the same is my church. And this reminds us a little bit of section 18, verse 20. It says, contend against no church, save it be the church of the devil. This gets into a sort of an interesting area. In a sense, some people understand this to mean that all churches are part of this broader church. And my response is, okay, if you're doing good, that's always God's purpose. God, in some degree, is always working everywhere. He's not just focusing on one people exclusively, ignoring his other children. God's no respecter of persons. But you have to honor that there is one true church, and we'll bring this up. This is brought up in section 1, 1 Nephi 14. There is one true church that holds keys. And I may do a separate podcast about that, is that if you don't believe in one true church, what's the point of the apostasy, and what's the point of missionary work? What's the point of doing temple work if it doesn't matter what church you belong to? But the idea that they're getting out here is that before the church is organized, you have different churches, but you have this one church that's worse than them all. And it may not be a specific denomination, it may be sort of more of a free-floating ideology that infects all the denominations. Like I said, I was upfront about Joseph Smith's imperfections and the 3 general authorities that got in trouble during my lifetime, so it's something to pay attention to. But there's some churches that are worse than the others, and there's just one that's worse than them all. So like I said, this is a long section. It covers a lot of ground, and it's not organized as we'd like it to be, but it's interesting to understand why the Lord talks to us that way. This seems to be a bit of a scattered brain, or hopping way He communicates to us. There's a reason for that. Now, point 2 is D&C 11, and this revelation is like a blessing of counsel to Hiram Smith. It's May 1829, so it's 11 months before the reorganization of the church, and Hiram Smith is giving counsel. And remember the terms, is that a revelation is sort of doctrinal instruction, And a commandment is a specific revelation. So a patriarchal blessing would be a commandment. This is also a commandment. And we lost those terms, but they're crystal clear when you read the Book of Commandments. And like I said, you can download a copy of it off of Archive or read it on the Joseph Smith paper site. So you get some of the language from section 4. Once again, you're supposed to seek for wisdom. When was the last time you prayed for the gift of wisdom? Is that a sin of omission? Seek wisdom not for riches, desires, again, which President Oaks talked about. Say nothing but repentance, as opposed to say nothing but show up to the ward activity, say nothing but sit up folding chairs. And he's also talked about his gift and spiritual guidance, too. Remember, you have a gift. Don't aspire to another person's gift. Nurture your gift. But he's told to wait. He had good desires, but there's a timing issue. President Oaks also gave a talk on timing. Now, this is an interesting contrast, Hiram Smith versus Oliver Cowdery, because Hiram Smith succeeded Oliver Cowdery as the second elder of the church, as the associate president of the church. And like I talked about last time, is Joseph Fielding Smith thought that if Joseph Smith was killed first, Hiram Smith then would become president of the church. But think about what happened with Oliver Cowdery, just thrown in there, whereas Hiram Smith was given a chance to slow down, take things slowly, not rush things, to able to study and just to wait before he was given called, and that helped him in a lot of areas that Oliver Cowdery didn't have health or strength in. The Word, the Rock, the Church, the Gospel. They is told, seek not to declare my word, but seek to obtain my word. Then thy tongue shall be loosened. Power of the convincing of men, but hold your peace. We have it was the Alma 29, that the voice of an angel and rouse the world with a trumpet, but sometimes you're told to keep your peace. God stops your utterance. Sometimes there's a time for you to keep quiet about things. Pearls before swine. That happened with Mormon. Happens with Christ did that during some of his trial. He just kept quiet and didn't argue stuff. Keeping quiet, it's an appropriate strategy. Backing out of a toxic conversation or a church discussion in a class to say, okay, I don't like the direction with this going. I'm going to keep quiet and letting it go. That's the best way of doing things. You see this happen with young members of the church, with converts, and I notice this with convert influencers. You have people who have joined the church, and they attract a following on social media for various reasons. They're better podcasts than mine. They have better production values. I don't have a theme song, and I don't sell bobbleheads. I talk about my book. That for me, that feels kind of appropriate, but I don't sell T-shirts here. I don't have cruise trips to Mexico. Just you, me, and the truth. And I hope you like that relationship, and I hope you like that dynamic. But this is what Joseph Smith said, Teachings of Prophet Joseph Smith, page 242. It is often the case that young members of this church, for want of better information, carry along with them their old notions of things, and sometimes fall into egregious errors. I've noticed with two of the social media influencers, and I'm not trying to pick a fight, so I'll just describe it. Two of them, they're both, one's sort of a ancestors, grew up Catholic. One was actually herself a convert from Catholicism. She celebrates Ash Wednesday and wears crosses. Another male one, he said he would attend a mass to honor his mother. Wilford Woodruff never thought those were good ideas, that you honor people by doing that. This is the man who's the most effective missionary of this dispensation. Never said, hey, look, I need to make my message a little bit more palatable to Catholics or to Protestants. The church is under condemnation for treating the Book of Mormon lightly, and that's part of it, is you have people who are in a position of influence, more so than I have, and they're bringing their old ideas in, and it's affecting the church. My ancestors knew Joseph Smith. They heard him preach. My first ancestor was the McBride branch. They joined in Kirtland. My last name is Hunter. I'm related to a collateral descendant of, or a relative of Everett Hunter, who is presiding bishop of the church. Edward Hunter knew Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith hid in his house and got section 138 or 128 in his house. He heard him speak. He sat at tables with Joseph Smith. He embraced Joseph Smith. And not once did Edward Hunter ever think reverting back and changing our message and engaging these old practices that developed during the Great Apostasy were good ideas. They didn't look back. So always remember Lot's wife. Back to Hiram Smith. Therefore, treasure up in your heart until the time which it is in wisdom that you should go forth. Section 88 says the same thing, is that you study this stuff, and then, including secular and temporal stuff, and it'll help you be an effective missionary. 22nd of December, 1835, Joseph Smith noted this in his journal. Spent this day at home endeavoring to treasure up knowledge for the benefit of my calling. Yeah, this wasn't jumping through a hoop, checking off a box for the award goal on reading the Book of Mormon, or your stake goal, or someone else's goal. This is doing this slowly with the correct desire, instead of having stuff imposed upon you. Later, the section says, Behold, this is your work, to keep my commandments, yea, with all your might, mind, and strength. Compare that to Moses 139 about Heavenly Father's or Jesus Christ's work and glory. Your work, keep the commandments. And there we are, 26 minutes. This is my second podcast, so sometimes my mouth wears out. The most I can do is probably about an hour and a half of talking straight, so I have to slow down and pace myself. So here we are at the Christ quotient. We're at the end of it, these two sections. These are wonderful sections. The atonement quotient. Yes, Joseph Smith made mistakes, but he was forgiven, and the same thing can happen to you. Losing 116 pages, that's a forgivable sin. You ever thought about that? Think about the dumb stuff you did. I do all the time. I have an abnormally good memory, and it keeps me in line. My grandfather was a temple worker in the Salt Lake Temple, and he, from what his home teacher said at his funeral, he had every single part in the temple memorized word perfect. Good memories keep you in line because you think about stuff. Hiram Smith waiting for a calling. I think it's interesting. This has been an interesting theme in my life. I spent about half my mission as a junior companion, and I never held any leadership position in my mission, and that had an effect upon me. It has an effect on how I see the church, what happens when I show up to church, and it really robbed me of a lot of experience in leadership positions. And I still feel it today, although I may be catastrophizing this beyond what's really going on. I was ordained a high priest at 46. At age 46, you have both my mission presidents were younger than that. They'd been bishops and stake presidents. That age, they were returned mission presidents, both of them. In fact, you have some men who are bishop, stake presidents, mission presidents. They're getting called at general authorities at the age where I was ordained a high priest. And it creates an interesting dynamic since you're ordaining college students as high priests now. It creates an awkward situation where I was older than some of the leaders, and I had to respect that, and I had to respect their office and the priesthood keys they're held. And there's some times where I actually had to confront some leaders, a matter of handling church finances, and I would have done it differently if I'd been a high priest. Like I said, I wouldn't call it a good experience, so I'd like to get this message out, at least one voice on thinking about these elders, since we've done away with the high priest groups. We're getting some superannuated elders, and is that a good thing? Since I am a high priest, this isn't self-serving, so it takes that accusation off the table. But President Uchtdorf, again, lift where you stand. Since I was an elder for so long, I'm still as accountable for the time and what I did with the office of elder. So as an elder, I served a full-time mission, learned a third language, Portuguese, Spanish, then French in high school, Spanish in elementary school, French in high school, and then Portuguese on your mission. So served a full-time mission, learned a third language, became a college graduate. I wrote and published a book. I did the normal duties of membership. I mean, being a member, that's also a calling. Going to the temple, studying your scriptures, voting, that's a member's duty. Reading, I've read through that's a comparative advantage I have. I've read through the teaching the presence of the church. I've read all the general conference talks. I didn't quite finish it. I got through most of it, but I was ordained, and so I finished it as a high priest. But every single conference talk. That's always a funny thing to talk about when people, hey, I read the Book of Mormon over 100 times. I'm accountable for what I did as an elder, even though I was, like I could have done more and I would have done things differently as a high priest. If you're just given one talent, just like the foolish servant, you have to magnify it as best you can. And if you're an elder, you're not a high priest for as long as I was, you're still accountable, because Jesus Christ is a loving Savior, but He's also really austere. Ultimately, so let patience be a spur for development, where you're not holding these callings that eat up a lot of time. Ultimately, being exalted is more important than being a high priest. Being married in the temple is more importantly than being a high priest, or being a bishop, or a stake president, or a temple president, because none of these callings are essential to exaltation. But honoring your covenants is, righteousness is, and focusing on Jesus Christ is essential to salvation. And Jesus Christ, that's the point.